With SEC basketball officially done, no other teams left in the tournament, I thought it would be a good time now to ask the question of who is actually the best in the SEC for men's basketball in 2021-2022. Got a couple of reasons for a few teams we'll discuss, and I also want to hear your opinions at the end. But first, I want to welcome you back to the channel, whether you're an Auburn family member or a fan of another persuasion. This is the E2C network where the Auburn family speaks. Our content here and on our podcast network may tend to be Auburn sports heavy, but if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our content. And thank you to members of our booster club like Corey Benson, who help produce videos like this. The dream of an all-SEC Final Four never got off the ground really as the tournament started, thanks Kentucky. But it was a reality at one point where you could have had Kentucky, Arkansas, Auburn, and Tennessee all meeting in the Final Four to prove once and for all for this year that the SEC was the best conference in men's basketball. However, I still think you could kind of make that case based off if you look at the whole body of work of all four of those teams, and we're going to talk about them in some detail, pros and cons of why here in a second. But I really truly think that the SEC was the best conference in men's basketball this year when you look at that group all together. To have that discussion though, let's talk about where the final standing stood at the end of the regular season. We do know that Tennessee won the SEC tournament, but here are the regular season standings. Auburn finished at the top, completing their regular season title in the very last game of the season. However, it wasn't for lack of trying from Tennessee, who just nearly was able to get that regular season title from Auburn had the Tigers not finished out in their final game. Right behind them are the Kentucky Wildcats. You always expect to see them at the top, so no shock there. Although it is a little odd when you see how they fared against a lot of the other teams that are in this conversation. And then finally, the Arkansas Razorbacks, which is surprising based off how they finished the entirety of the year, to think about them being fourth in the SEC regular season. So I want to take those four teams, the ones that there is a clear argument for being the best of the SEC, and talk about what's their overall storyline, the pros and the cons for each of them, and then maybe, just maybe, we can come up to a decision of who was the best in the SEC. Let's start with Auburn. It's pretty obvious, right? Regular season champions. It's pretty obvious to make a case right there who's the best in the SEC for walking through their conference and taking the regular season title. The way they started off, not just in SEC play, but in non-conference play, was really good and set them up for success, despite, which was probably their biggest weakness, the way they faltered late in the season in conference play and in non-conference play as well. The Tigers were extremely talented with the best player in the league and probably one of the best overall teams, but that's their biggest weakness is how they faltered late in conference play especially. Now let's talk about Tennessee. Pretty easy case because they were the SEC tournament champions. They have a really solid case, especially the way they started finishing the season. And notice I say started. Didn't really finish because of the way you exited. I know Auburn exited early also. It's all part of the equation here. Tennessee had one of the best finishes to conference play along with the tournament. They were a very talented team that I'm surprised didn't last longer in the NCAA tournament. Their biggest flaw was how they weren't able to rise to some of the bigger moments that they had opportunities for, especially early on in the season. Now, not all of them. They did win some big games, even in conference play as well. But if you kind of look at how it ended for them, that's kind of the story, not rising fully to the occasion in those big moments. Next, we have Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky. Now, honestly, seriously, Kentucky year in and year out is the most talented and has the highest prestige of all of the conference teams to date. Hopefully that'll be changing in the future, but I digress. It's still Kentucky, and they're always formidable. What John Calipari brings in and out every single year is absolutely incredible, and that's why they are always part of this conversation. However, his biggest knock is that he's not able to sometimes coalesce all that talent into a cohesive unit. So their biggest pro, obviously, is their talent and they having the ability to beat anybody, anywhere on any given day. There's never really a question of that when it comes to Kentucky, and that was true this year as well. But their biggest flaw was their hot and cold nature, not just in conference play, but out of conference as well. Their biggest thing right now, losing to the Peacocks, the St. Peter's Peacocks. We didn't even know who these people were until the first round game where they upset Kentucky. It's the same old storyline Kentucky has every single year, it seems like, unless they win the title, where they just can't get all that talent to coalesce. And finally, that brings us to Arkansas, the lone representative who made it into the Elite Eight for the SEC. Very strong finish for Eric Musselman and his Hogs. And their fan base has been pretty fun to watch here on this channel. You guys you're interesting. I'll say that much. Their biggest pro is they are a well-rounded team. And not that any of the other teams we haven't discussed here are not well-rounded teams, but you see well-rounded team along with star power. JD Notae had a case for being the best SEC player in conference play this season. Obviously, I think that's Jabari Smith, but JD had a case for himself. You throw in players like Jalen Williams alongside him, one of the best defensive players in the SEC this year too, and you've got star power along a well-rounded team around you. It makes for a very potent thing. The problem for them is, the biggest con for them is how slow they got off to a start. They didn't really have a impressive non-conference start, and then the way they began SEC play was a little lackluster too. So really that's the storyline for them, is how long it took them to get going, but when they finally did, wow, they appeared to be a really great team. And that SEC tournament early exit's a bit of a knock for them too, but you can't take away how they finished in March Madness. So now that's the question before us now. Who is the best of the SEC based off of all of this information? Well, Kentucky, I'm just going to be honest with you, you're out of this conversation. You couldn't beat Auburn. You couldn't beat Tennessee on the road. You couldn't beat Arkansas on the road. You can't beat them. You beat Tennessee one time. You can't really have a strong case against that. You're out of this discussion. In that same vein, you could probably start to move Auburn out of the pack of that. However, their strong cases elsewhere, I think, still put them in as part of this conversation. So it really comes down to this. If Auburn had had a better showing in the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament, they win this argument. If Tennessee had had a better showing in some of their bigger moments outside of the SEC tournament, they win this discussion. And if Arkansas had had a better start along with a better SEC tournament performance, they are the winner of this discussion, which really leaves me with a bit of conundrum because I can't answer this question. I'm having a hard time. I can make a case for any of these three being the best of the SEC this year. So I'm going to leave it up to you. What do you think? Who would be the best of the SEC for you? If you're a fan of a certain team here, obviously make the case for your team, but try to make a case for one of the other teams as well. I want to hear your honest opinions in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this type of content, please do help support it by smashing that like button. If you want more from us, be sure to subscribe along with hitting that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads or live streams. There's ways that you can help support our content listed in the description, such as hitting the join button here to become a channel member, or heading over to patreon.com/E2C network to join the booster club where you can get some extra perks for yourself. Thank you for tuning into the E2C network, where the Auburn family speaks. War Eagle.